Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the Publicize webinar with Publicize CEO Conrad Egusa. First of all, I just want to take a quick second to thank everybody that took the time out of their day to join us to talk PR strategies for startups. And I'll get right into asking Conrad if he could tell us just a little bit about himself, about your background.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, again for coming. About my background, it primarily comes from an intersection of media and startups. So in regards to media, I was a writer for the tech publication VentureBeat, and I've contributed to publications such as TechCrunch and Forbes, and I've invested in a number of publications as well. I think on the startup perspective, in addition to Publicize, I'm a global mentor at 500 Startups and a few other accelerators, and earlier had raised funding in Silicon Valley for my first startup. So my goal with this is to try to take as much knowledge that I have about PR to share it with you all today. So thanks so much again for coming.
All right, thanks, Conrad. Obviously, I work with you, so I have a couple of answers to some of these questions, but I'd like to share your knowledge with the people. And I was wondering if you could tell me really quick, can you give me a more in-depth description of your previous PR or media industry experience before starting Publicize, and maybe if you could touch on some lessons that you learned or ideas that gave you while working in that industry.
Absolutely. I think the probably the most applicable was when I was a writer for VentureBeat in New York, and I think the two lessons and things that you can all take away from that experience was I'll kind of share a story about the first one. A friend of mine in New York came up to me. He said, "Conrad, I know you write for VentureBeat. Can you write a story about my company?" And I said, "Sure. What do you have to announce?" He said, "Well, I don't have anything to announce." And I said, "Well, if you don't have anything to announce, then I can't. There's no story. There's no article that I can write about." So the kind of the first lesson from VentureBeat that I hope everyone can take away is when you do reach out to the media, it's important you have some type of announcement to make, and especially for early stage companies, a lot of the times those announcements would be maybe a launch of a new product. Maybe you're launching version 2.0 of your mobile app, or you have a milestone, or you've raised funding. But it's important to reach out with those specific announcements because those in general are what's going to be covered by these articles. I think the second big takeaway coming from VentureBeat was looking at the compensation structure of a lot of these publications. So if you look at the large publications, there are a few full-time employees, but the majority of the writers are contract writers. And some of them, for example, might receive, let's say $20, $25 per article and a bonus based on the number of views of those articles. So when you think about that compensation structure and these writers who are living in New York or San Francisco, very expensive cities, you realize that they have to produce just an enormous number of articles. And the reason why that's important is when I was writing a VentureBeat and somebody sent me something, I would know, hey, is this article that they prepared everything so well that I know it's going to take me, let's say, 15 or 20 minutes to write? Or is, hey, this is the type of article that's going to take me, 5 or 6 hours to write because I have to do all this extra research. So it's important for all of you when you do reach out to the media that a lot of the work you do, it's basically designed to save a journalist as much time as possible and to kind of reduce that friction and to make it as easy as possible for them to publish an article.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is good. We're actually going to dive in a little bit deeper. I have a couple of more questions for you that'll touch on newsworthiness of announcements, etc. But can you tell me really quick, just a yes or no answer, is public relations important for startups?
I think absolutely. And the benefit of PR, I think, for one, of course, kind of, if you're looking to drive revenue, drive traffic, I think, especially if you have, let's say, a marketplace and you have this kind of chicken and egg scenario about, hey, that's really important for their PR. When you get this enormous boost of traffic, is very effective to solving that. I think a lot of things that people don't look into. I actually look at PR as a secret weapon for SEO. So it's very important. I think in terms of raising your social proof when you're looking for partners or investors, even today, if I'm speaking to somebody, I'll say something like, "Hi, I'm the CEO of Publicize. If you want to see, here's a link to our Forbes article here." And it's interesting to see how someone's perspective will change once they see that you kind of have this social proof and press coverage surrounded around you. So I think there are a number of really effective marketing channels, but I think over the long term, it's hard to beat. I think marketing these PR efforts.
You mentioned something that's interesting. You said PR is a secret weapon for SEO. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So I think in general, over 50% of on average a site's traffic is going to be driven by search. And there are kind of two primary factors to that. For one, kind of the content on your site. So, if somebody's searching for these keywords, or those keywords on your site. But I think the more important factor, I think, it's going to range, but I think a lot of people would consider about 70% of the factor of how well your site's going to rank is going to come from the people linking to your website. And for example, with Publicize, shortly after we were featured on TechCrunch, we started ranking for startup PR as the #1 result. And that was, I believe, directly because of TechCrunch. So the reason why I say that is if you do a great job with PR, you don't necessarily have to go out of your way for SEO to find these other links because you already have all these very high page rank sites linking to you.
Okay, great. So let's kind of step away real quick and kind of pretend that I am a startup founder and I'm looking to get coverage in the mainstream media or tech blogs for my company. And what's the first thing I should consider not do if I want to begin a PR campaign for my startup?
Yeah, I think the very first thing is you can actually strategize, I would say, the next 6, 9, 12 months about what specific announcements you have to make. And one of the things that's important is you might have had prior announcements from, let's say, 3 or 6 months ago that you never actually published online that you could also announce. So maybe, hey, somebody had invested $100,000 into your company, but you never announced it. You could still bring that online. So the very first thing you should do is say, okay, what announcements do I have for the next 6 or 9 months? Okay, maybe this next month we're going to be launching our mobile app, and then 6 or 8 weeks later we're going to be announcing 100,000 in angel rounding of funding. 8 weeks later we have a milestone of 50,000 users. 8 weeks later we have version 2.0. So your goal with each of these points is basically to maximize as much media coverage as possible for each of those announcements.
Okay, great. Can you tell me then what makes an announcement newsworthy? Why is it important to the press? Why is it important to an audience?
Yeah, so I think there are probably two very important factors. One is the founding team, and the second is basically the mission of the company. I think the other thing to keep in mind is kind of design is very important as well. The reason why I mentioned that is I remember at VentureBeat, for example, there was my editor at the time said, Conrad, can you cover this story of this company launching? I said, hey, what's the company do? He said, it doesn't even matter. The company was founded by Bill Gates, Microsoft's founder's former assistant. So that's what actually made it newsworthy, because it was such kind of an interesting person, interesting profile that was founding this. And you see as well, we've had a lot of clients feature on these leading publications where the company is actually not that exciting. But what is exciting is maybe the founder is 70 years old, or maybe the founder is only 17. And that actually makes, regardless of the company. And I think vice versa, let's say the founding team doesn't have anything to really highlight about themselves. How do you make your company kind of mission much more exciting? So a lot of times what I tell startups is, what your product is today isn't particularly interesting. Any writer can visit your site and see what it does. What is really interesting is where you want to take the company. So do you guys all know when you're working on your company and you're in the gym or you're about to go to bed and you're just daydreaming hey, this is where my company is going to be in 3 years, right? You're like, hey, it's going to be 200 employees and we're going to be taking over the world, right? That vision where you see your company being, that's what we should kind of express in your company, et cetera. And an example of this, two kind of separate cases. I'd started a co-working space and Publicize as well. It's kind of a PR company. Those aren't the most exciting companies. Like a co-working space, you're renting space. But we were able to get on BBC and TechCrunch, Financial Times, and the reason why was the story wasn't, hey, we want to rent kind of office space, right? Hey, this is how much it costs, et cetera. The story that we pitched was we want to help turn this city into the Silicon Valley of Latin America. That was what was interesting. And with Publicize, it wasn't, hey, we want to be a PR company. The story was, hey, we really want to change the way all companies approach PR. So whatever that kind of big mission is, I really encourage you guys to try to focus on that, because that's what makes a really interesting story.
Okay. How important is it that your big mission align with some sort of theme that might be playing out in the media at the time? Is that important or not important?
Yeah, I think it does help. So let's say you have a startup in the kind of the security industry, and hey, privacy's like been in the news 24/7 for the past week. Hey, there are ways to kind of piggyback on that, and I do think that gives you a boost. But I think I wouldn't let that deter you. I don't think you should wait 6 months for the kind of news to align with what your startup does. But I think that would give kind of an added boost.
What materials are absolutely necessary to have prepared before I reach out to a journalist?
Mm-hmm. The two by far most kind of important pieces of material would be the email pitch and the press release. So there's a lot of confusion about press releases. The purpose of a press release is not to sell a journalist on covering the story. The purpose of the email is actually to sell the journalist on, hey, this is an interesting story. You should dig further into covering this. Once a journalist has decided, hey, this sounds somewhat interesting, I want to research more, they're going to open up the press release, and it's a document that is a little hard to read in a lot of ways. It's not meant for the general public, and it's basically meant for journalists to read, to take that information, and then kind of allow them to better author an article. So essentially the goal of the press release is kind of like I mentioned before, to reduce as much friction as possible, because you're basically saying, hey, I know this article might take you 2 or 3 hours to write, so I'm going to do all the research ahead of time and put it in a press release, so you don't even have to do all that extra research. So you're kind of saying ahead of time, like, hey, for example, I'm launching this mobile app in this specific market, let's say for hospitals, and I'm going to do all this research to figure out, like, hey, how much money is spent on hospital healthcare every year, etc. So by doing that, you're basically saving these journalists time.
Okay, great. So in terms of the press release, that's going to be a 1 page. How long should it be of information that I need to know about this announcement, about the company? What are some things that I need to put in that?
Yeah, I think it's in general about 1 or 2 pages, and we're happy to send a link later of kind of different templates that people can follow. In general, they do follow specific templates. I think the first thing is you should be very clear in the title what the announcement is. So you shouldn't say like, mobile health app is this. What you should say is mobile health app is, for example, announcing the launch of its mobile app. And that's really the story that they're going to cover. So be really clear about that. I think the other thing too is, in general, the most important information should be placed in, I would say, the top 2 or 3 paragraphs. The primary reason is, that's what's going to entice them to continue reading. So I remember working with somebody, and at the very end of the call, they said, hey, I didn't know if I should tell you this, but my founder and I are actually Stanford PhDs. But we don't know if we should even mention that to a journalist. And I said, mention it to a journalist, we have to lead with that information. So that should go in the first paragraph or the title, etc. So whatever kind of most impressive information, whether it's, and social proof kind of goes 2 ways. On one hand, it could be a company that you worked for, it could be a Google, it could be like an award you received, or maybe a university you studied at, maybe you went to Oxford or Stanford, etc. But on the other hand, let's say you don't have that, it could be kind of an interesting fact about your company. Like I mentioned before, maybe you're a 60, 70-year-old founder. Maybe you're very young. Maybe you were homeless for a period of time. Something that kind of adds an interesting narrative into the story. So it can kind of go either of those 2 ways, but it's important to place that kind of as high as possible that you can.
Okay, great. So maybe let's take even more of a step back. Mm-hmm. Instead of just talking about preparing a press release, I guess, what should I have prepared company-wise so that I know that when a journalist is researching me, they're going to find everything they need and they're going to be impressed and want to write about it? How for example,
I think
if I have a website under construction, that might impact when a journalist lands there on whether or not they're going to be writing the story.
I mean, absolutely. I think the website really should be 100%. LinkedIn, Twitter as well. usually what happens is a company would reach out and say, like, hey, we're thinking about launching. When should we contact the media? And particularly when you're about to launch, what I'd recommend is starting with basically an alpha launch with just your closest friends. Like this could be 4, 5, 10 people, where you basically have them test your product and make sure, hey, are we ready to actually bring this to the kind of the public markets essentially? And if you're not ready for 1,000 plus people to visit your product, you shouldn't be reaching out to press in any way. So it's important to kind of first have these initial testing sessions to make sure you're ready for that.
No, that makes perfect sense. What about a press kit? Is that important, and what information should I put in?
I think it is really important, particularly for kind of the basics facts about the company. Hey, when was it founded? Who are the founding team members, et cetera. I think the other thing that's really important is including photos of your company. So this is always surprising to me at VentureBeat. So they didn't like some publications don't like when the main photos are just of the company logo. So it actually makes it very hard to find company photos to include in the articles. So, I mean, it could take just as long to find a good photo as it does to actually author the article. So any kind of photos that you can take of your team, or maybe of your team and your logo in the background that you could send, just makes it a lot easier for a journalist as well.
Yeah, I've heard actually a number of journalists that I've reached out to before have even mentioned that, hey, if you have one that's not necessarily like a profile picture, if you have a picture of your team at work, for example, or some sort of action shot, it might be a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Let me dive back in and remind me, did we go over what makes my announcement newsworthy? I think we've dove into that a little bit. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have anything to add, we can go on to the next question.
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of actionable takeaway items, it would be find 1 to 2 things that really stand out about you or the founding team that you can highlight. And the second would be, how do you make your mission at the company seem much bigger than it really is? So just as another example, remember we'd helped this company called Lingually. I think it was New York Times, TechCrunch, some others. And it was basically just a Chrome plugin. But the way we pitched it wasn't, hey, this is a Chrome plugin, right? To help people learn, to help people basically translate words. The way we approached it was, hey, the big mission is to change the way people learn languages online. So that's a huge mission that so I would just encourage all of you guys to focus on that bigger mission as opposed to just the product as it is today.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's say that I have my announcement now. I have prepared the things I need, a press release, a media kit, some photos, and kind of that I have an understanding of my bigger mission. Now, how do I know what type of publication is right for my announcement? And maybe you could give some examples of certain types of announcements that would get featured in mainstream media, maybe versus tech media, like a TechCrunch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, the reason why I emphasize focusing on, let's say, the large tech media publications, particularly people within startups, is that in general, it flows into mainstream media. So in regards to kind of which publications to target, obviously, the big ones being, let's say, TechCrunch, VentureBeat. There's kind of a group of, Huffington Post as well, BuzzFeed, Business Insider. In regards to kind of which journalists you should contact, usually what I'd recommend is, hey, if you're an app in, let's say, the healthcare space, you can kind of Google search, mobile app healthcare, Business Insider, and you can find pretty quickly which journalists would be more likely to cover that specific announcement. The one thing to think about, I think, on the bright side, is that if you look at where your startup is in the media cycle, really just starting out, in general, the coverage is going to be positive. Because if your company wasn't particularly exciting, a journalist wouldn't write a negative article in general. They would just not cover the story. So because of that, it helps a great deal, as opposed to, we also, work with companies like Microsoft, and it's the reverse. Like when you do reach out to publications on behalf of Microsoft, it's very likely that the story could be negative. So you have to be more careful, I think, as a company gets larger. But when you're first starting off, I would say 90% or more of the articles are going to be favorable.
Okay, great. But before we dive into deeper about, how do I find a journalist that's right for my story, I just want to give a quick reminder to everybody who's listening that you will be able to ask questions of Conrad at the very end of the webinar, probably the last 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have any, go ahead and type them into the chat section, and I'll make sure that Conrad answers them for you. All right, so in terms, you talked about, what publication is right for my story, but now how should I search for the right journalist that is going to cover my story?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Jim, I just wanted to mention as well, I'm going to type my email in as well. If you guys have any other PR questions, please feel free to send them over to me, and I'm happy to answer any of them. In regards to kind of the specific, I never found this to be particularly difficult. I think, in general, because your company is going to kind of occupy a specific space. So, I would say really a quick Google search, and you'll be able to find out, hey, does this writer cover more, sports and technology, or more like healthcare and technology? And you can kind of get a pretty good sense of that. So yeah, I would say, spending 5 minutes on Google, and you'll be able to kind of filter what kind of journalists would be most likely to cover your article.
Okay, great. And then once I've found somebody that really does fit, what's a good way to go about building a relationship with that journalist?
I mean, I would say that the best thing is just be incredibly respectful of their time. So, these journalists are getting hundreds upon hundreds of emails every day, and they can only choose, let's say, half a dozen stories to write about. So, and it's just important to show that you really appreciate that. And I think having some experience in writing helps, just because you realize how hard it is to really do what these people do. And so I would say, that's being kind of respectful of their time, and also kind of going out of your way to say, like, thank you as well. That could be, let's say they publish an article. Most of the times, I remember at VentureBeat, like, you never hear from the person again. And even somebody writing an email saying something like, hey, can I I'd love to send you some chocolates just to say thank you. Kind of no monetary value whatsoever, but just to say, I really appreciate your time. I think that goes a really long way. And it's important as well within this industry, because like and Jim, you've seen this as well, a lot of the writers who write, let's say at Wall Street Journal right now, were writing at TechCrunch like 2 years ago, right? So like, it's kind of a small industry where maybe someone leaves VentureBeat, but they pop up, a year later at another publication. So you definitely see a lot of the same people.
Yeah, actually, we've done past webinars with Dylan Tweeney and Rebecca Grant, both of VentureBeat, and some others. And I know Rebecca and another Forbes journalist have mentioned that in addition to pitching your story, they appreciate when you pitch a story that's going on in the industry that has nothing to do with you. I mean, that goes a long way as well. If you've heard of something that's going on, or a new company that's building something, or massive layoff or something like that, that information is really their bread and butter, and they would appreciate that. So those are other things to think about.
Absolutely. And one of the things I should have added as well, I think there's a huge benefit to offering an exclusive. And Jim, we might talk about this later, but basically, if you're pitching a story, offering them first right to cover it and to publish it online. And I think that is, journalists would appreciate that, because you're basically saying, hey, I could send this to 200 journalists, but I most want to send it to you. And I think that's another tool that you could use to build relationships as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's dive a little bit deeper into exclusive in a second. I want to ask you first about how do you reach out to a journalist for the first time? This is a cold email or a cold call.
Yeah. So I'd recommend email. Absolutely. I would strongly recommend against calling in any way. I think there are some journalists who don't mind when you call, but there are also journalists who get very, very angry when you call. So I think just to be safe, I would say email. And another thing that's important is, if you ever think about using a PR syndication site, let's say like a Business Wire or a PR Web, I mean, if you want kind of your news to be indexed by Google, et cetera, that can be effective. But I've never known of a journalist who said like, hey, I was just browsing Business Wire and I came across this that was really interesting. In general, their stories are going to be emailed to them. So I'd start with including the email, with emailing. It's really important, I think, again, to leave this social proof. So if I was going to email a journalist, for example, when I was featured on Entrepreneur Magazine, and a lot of people presumed I knew that journalist, but I didn't. But the way I wrote him was I said, I think his name was Chris. I said, "Hi, Chris. My name is Conrad Egusa." I included a LinkedIn profile. I said, I'm the CEO of this company, and I'm a global mentor at 500 startups. And I think the reason why that was important is he might not know anything about me, but he probably had heard of 500 startups, and he probably had connections to that organization. So there's kind of a level of trust there. And I think the reason why I included my LinkedIn profile was because he could very easily see, hey, I don't know this person, but I see that we have 100 mutual connections. So it's really important to do that as well. And if you're not kind of very active in LinkedIn, it could be a Twitter account as well. It could be even your Facebook, but basically a way to say like, hey, I'm emailing you. I'm not this kind of fake spammer. I have this online profile that's very important. Let me see. I'm going to go through some of the other questions I think Jim was going to ask. I think to begin, let's say you determine what announcement you want to make. So your company is about to launch. Like, what's the next process of basically taking that announcement and getting a feature on TechCrunch? And you basically have two separate methods you can go, two strategies. One is to offer an exclusive, and the other is to offer an embargo. And an exclusive basically means you're going to contact, let's say, someone at TechCrunch or the New York Times and say, hey, we're about to launch our company. Would you want first right to cover it? No one else is going to cover this story first. You can. And usually you say until a very specific time. The second method, an embargo, is basically you'd email, let's say, 20 publications. You would say, hey, we're about to launch our company this Wednesday at 12 o'clock East Coast time. Would you like to cover the launch of the company? If so, you have to agree to this embargo, which basically means you can't publish the story ahead of time. So if you ever see, for example, sometimes the government has a story, and you'll notice that at 12:01, like CNN, NBC, all the big publications will cover this at the exact same time. And you think like, how is that possible that all these publications were able to, who just heard about the announcement at noon, were able to publish a story only 1 minute later? And the reason is they were all given the story ahead of time, and they agreed to the embargo that they wouldn't publish it until that specific time. So I hope that kind of makes sense, the difference between an exclusive and embargo. The benefit of an embargo is it's basically a risk reward proposition. Like on one hand, more people might cover your startup, but on the other hand, maybe no one covers the specific announcement and you kind of lose out on that. As opposed to the exclusive, you improve your chances greatly, especially with the largest publications. So just in general, it's going to vary within each company whether to use an exclusive or embargo. But kind of as a general rule, I would say if your announcement is bigger than a seed round of funding, I would recommend an embargo. But if it's smaller, let's say you're launching a mobile app, et cetera, and it's just not, it's not this is, let's say you're not like a co-founder of Facebook making this announcement, you're kind of a relatively new founder, I would recommend an exclusive to one of the leading publications. Jim, I was just explaining the difference between the exclusive and embargo.
Right. Thank you, Conrad. I appreciate you manning the ship. I apologize, guys. It looks like the internet dropped out. Let me get back into it real quick with a question about email pitches. Can you give me an idea about what is it, why is it important, and what are the 3 things I need to include in that?
Yeah. So I would include the first, making sure that in the subject line, in the first line, if it is an exclusive, emphasizing that. So the email, and if you guys email me at conrad@publicize.co, I can send you guys an example email template of what we've used to get, let's say, our own companies on TechCrunch and Forbes, et cetera. And it could say something like, "Hi, Anthony," let's say at TechCrunch. This is Conrad Egusa, LinkedIn. Quick background about myself. I'm writing to see if you'd be interested in an exclusive for, let's say, my company milestone or this kind of launch of this new product. So I think right after that, you would talk about kind of the big mission of, where do you want to take this in the next few years? you'd probably include, let's say, a line or two about that, and then maybe a line or two about the specifics. So as an example, with Espacio, the big mission was, hey, to help turn the city into the Silicon Valley of Latin America. But then right after, we would say, we're going to be doing that because, we're going to be providing this space and, and these kind of events, et cetera, and this. So you kind of combine the big mission with also kind of the specifics of what the product or company is today.
And how big, in terms of length, is a pitch email?
You know what, I would say, I would probably leave it to about 3 paragraphs long, so you kind of have enough information there, but it's not too long. I think, and what you would do is you would attach a press release basically saying, hey, if you are interested in this, I've attached a press release with more information. So, I think, yeah, probably the shorter the email, the better, although make sure to kind of get as much interesting information there as possible. And one of the things that's important too is to include data points. So when someone's like, hey, this is such a big market, it's like, I have no idea what that means, right? Like, is that like a $10,000 market? Is that like a $10 billion market? So, but you can kind of stretch those words, but you really can't like stretch data. So if you're launching a company in this specific market and you're able to say, this market, according to this study, linked to that study is, $5.5 billion. Like, that's really important because journalists are looking to include that in their articles.
Okay, awesome. Let's say that I have, written my pitch email, reached out to a journalist, and they respond and they want to interview me. Mm-hmm. Might give me a little bit of a panic as a startup founder for the first time talking to the media. Can you give me an idea of how I should prepare for an interview?
Yeah, I think absolutely kind of review all the material that you've sent. The good thing about, usually it'll be a founder or executive team members that you know your company inside and out. I think the biggest thing is to be as flexible as possible for the phone call, because let's say a journalist says they want to cover your story. Usually there's probably like a 70% chance once they say they want to cover it that they're going to write an article, right? So let's say you have a phone call with a journalist. I don't think we've ever really had a situation where somebody, and I'm just trying to think, I don't know of any case where a journalist has had the interview and then not published an article after. There might have been 1 or 2 cases, but it's almost like you improve your chances of getting published, to 98% plus. So as much as possible, aim to be on that phone call. I remember, when we were on Forbes, the journalist wrote and said, hey, when are you available to have the phone call? And I basically said something like, I'm available from like 9 a.m. to like 11 p.m. and then like 1 a.m. to like 4. Like, we had very different work hours, but because of the time difference. But I was basically like, I'm available 24 hours, whether I have to wake up at 3 a.m. for this phone call or whether, I have to stay up to 11 p.m. And I think, I remember when he responded, I think they really appreciated that I would go so out of my way to make sure to be on that call.
Okay. No, that makes great sense. And I think maybe one of the major takeaways of all this that you've said is just be considerate and be respectful, and make sure that you have all the information that a journalist could possibly need. So maybe those are some things that we could hammer down as a takeaway. I have just a couple of questions left, and then I'd like to open it up for people to start asking their own questions within the chat tab on the sidebar. So go ahead and ask away, folks. And meanwhile, I'll ask these next 2 questions for you, Conrad. If an article does get published about my company, what do you suggest I do to maximize the value, the visits to my website? How do I get the most out of that article?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that's really important is, let's say somebody agrees, let's say TechCrunch agrees to an exclusive and you get the article online. That doesn't mean once the article comes online, you can email other publications to further coverage as much as possible. And so you'll see, for example, when we make an announcement, maybe we'll give the exclusive to TechCrunch or VentureBeat, and then Forbes or Oxford Magazine will cover it later, or Inc., etc. And the process of that is, once an article comes online, you're gonna email the most time-sensitive publications to the least time-sensitive. So just as an example, let's say TechCrunch covers your story. The most time-sensitive publications are other tech publications. So you really do, within the next 12 or 24 hours, have to email the Next Web, Tech.co, all these others. Because if you wait 2 or 3 days, they're gonna write you back and say, hey, this would have been interesting, but TechCrunch covered that 2 days ago. So you're going to email the most time sensitive, and then after that, you're going to email more kind of mainstream business, tech publications. So a lot of these were historically monthly magazines, so Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, etc. They're much less time sensitive. And then usually the last group would be more industry verticals. So if you, let's say, are launching a health mobile app and you get it on TechCrunch, well, there are obviously a lot of publications that focus on kind of the health market, etc. that you would then contact. I think in terms of once an article comes online, it's important. I actually look at it like 50% once the article comes online, 50% of the responsibility is on the publication itself to kind of, with the distribution, to spread the article. And actually 50% of the responsibility is on you to kind of promote the article to get as much benefit as possible. Like, it's shocking to me when you see people get on Business Insider or Wall Street Journal and they don't even share it on their own Facebook, right? Yeah, that's an asset that you can kind of underutilize, or you can you could really take full advantage of it.
Actually, and yeah, just to kind of add to that, from speaking to other journalists, I know that they appreciate it as well. When you share on your Facebook or your Twitter and you tweet at them and say, hey, great article about us by X writer at the Next Web, that's huge. That helps a lot, and it shows appreciation. Absolutely. So I would definitely recommend including the journalists that wrote about you within all of your shares.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to know, so I'll just give you guys kind of a secret that I think will come in handy to each of you. So when you look at a journalist, many of their compensation structure are based on how many shares, how widely spread their articles get, right? How many visitors. So it's really important if they know that you're actively going to be promoting that article, like, that helps them. So one of the things in terms of the secret is that a lot of news publications, the reason why they focus on Y Combinator startups is because a lot of Y Combinator startups, when they're featured, get on the homepage of Hacker News, which then gets, let's say, tens of thousands of more visits. So it makes sense for a journalist to want to cover Y Combinator startup because they know they have that entrance into Hacker News. But now that works. You don't need to be Y Combinator startup to take advantage of that, though. As long as they know, hey, I remember, some of our journalists, I would make a big point to say, hey, the article that you wrote, we got, on the front page of all these different, we got it very widely spread because, again, we knew that it would kind of benefit them and they'd appreciate it.
That's great. No, that little bit about Y Combinator, I didn't know. Mm-hmm. That's great. Can you tell me, and let's go back and put me in the role of a startup founder. I'm a startup founder. Last month, I launched my app. I don't have any funding in the near future. It's kind of hard for me to roll out another big announcement that's going to be newsworthy. But if I do want to stay in the media and I do want to have this kind of conversation with my audience and with the media, what are some other PR techniques that I can use to keep my company's name out there?
So there are a bunch of different things you could do, but in terms of, hey, what's going to get the highest ROI? They're going to come from featured articles, and they're going to come from guest articles that you publish yourself. So just as an example, there are kind of a lot of misconceptions about PR. So let's say there are 2 articles on TechCrunch. One of the articles is only about your company. It's like, XYZ company announces its mobile app, right? The second article is about like a general topic, and it just includes a quote from you. So your company got on TechCrunch for both those articles, but one article probably had like a 50 or 100 times greater impact, right? In terms of traffic and all these different things. So in terms of ROI, it makes sense to aim for the featured articles and also for these guest articles. And if you guys ever see on TechCrunch, for example, those contributor articles, those provide a great opportunity. It's actually, we probably publish 2 or 3 times. I would say probably at least twice a week. Those are our clients, that will help author those articles. But anyone can author those articles and submit them. And your goal is, let's say again you have a healthcare, let's say a mobile app in the healthcare industry. Your article wouldn't necessarily directly promote yours, but it could be about how tech is disrupting this specific industry. And because of that, people are going to, it will include a link to your website, and it'll be kind of widely shared. And it's a way to essentially position yourself as a thought leader in that space. So I think that's like a great opportunity that a lot of people don't take advantage of, where you're going to see a very, very positive ROI on that as well. And a specific example for Publicize, we do that constantly with the Next Web and Forbes, etc., where we'll write a guest article, and it won't be like, this is what Publicize is, but it'll be like, this is some advice on PR, or this is where we see the industry heading. So that's why when, we've seen that kind of positive ROI from those efforts.
Okay, without diving too deep into it, because we actually plan to have Dylan Tweeney from the Next Web chat in April with us about what makes a good guest article, what it's all about. But maybe in 15 words or less, Conrad, can you tell me, what is the mission of a guest article? What's its importance?
Yeah, I mean, I think primary purpose would be to educate and kind of add value to that specific audience. So it shouldn't be promotional. It will include a link in your byline to your site, and in general, you should discuss kind of the industry or topic. If you're looking for the highest ROI, it should discuss kind of the specific space that you're in, and if there's any kind of interesting topic, et cetera, or things that you've learned that you feel like would be applicable to other entrepreneurs, those are kind of great places to start for these articles.
All right, great. Okay, well, I'm going to dive right into some questions from the audience. And Marcin has a question. If you're a small company, isn't it too risky to offer exclusive press releases to one journalist? I mean, what can we do if they won't even reply on our email? Can we send exclusive, e.g., 4 days later to another journalist? I think that's a good point that maybe we didn't make clear when we were talking about exclusive.
Okay. Yeah. So in regards to the answer, usually what we recommend is to offer exclusive, basically one a day. And so at the beginning of the morning, we would include on the email, this exclusive is essentially applicable until the following day. So if a journalist doesn't follow up and you contact another reporter, they would kind of understand that opportunity was, is no longer there. And the reason why that's important is if you want to get yourself very easily blacklisted on these publications, you would email 3 publications on the same day with an exclusive, and if 2 of them said yes, you have to choose one of them. The other one essentially again it's very likely you could kind of be blacklisted by the publication. But the idea is, let's say you decide in 10 days you want to make this announcement. On day 1, let's say email one reporter at TechCrunch in the morning. And later that day, you'd follow up. If no response, the next day you would contact another journalist with the exclusive, etc.
Okay, great. So it's good to set a timeline and a clear timeline to let them know that I will be moving on if you don't get this. So there's no friction later on.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. All right. We're going to be wrapping up the webinar here in a minute or two. If anybody else has any last minute questions, please go ahead and write them in here. Conrad, maybe if you could give us a little bit more insight into what Publicize does in the meantime while we wait for a question.
Yeah, I think the goal of Publicize was essentially, as opposed to a $10,000 a month PR company with a 6-month retainer. When I was writing a venture beat, I saw that PR didn't have to cost that much. We could deconstruct the process and pass savings to clients to be as low as $3.99 a month, basically making it month to month. And we're excited because this next week we're going to be launching a 100% money back guarantee for our enterprise as well. And the idea is to really take a startup approach to PR and really look to add as much value as possible. I think one of the things I want to emphasize as well. Please feel free to contact me at Conrads@publicize.co. I really obviously 100% believe with everything we're doing with Publicize. But at the same time, if you guys have any questions just about PR in general, please feel free to write me. We also have a host of. If you sign up for a newsletter, you'll see you get access to a pretty big journalist database. They're kind of a lot of. I think a lot of kind of cool free stuff that we provide as well. So please feel free to use that stuff as much as possible as well.
Okay, great. And to let you guys know as well, we will be publishing this and all of our webinars on the Publicize community page, so you can go back and reference later, or you can share with your friends and let them know as well. It looks like we're going to wrap up here. And first of all, I'd like to thank everybody that took the time out of their day. I hope you walked away with some valuable information. And thank you to you as well, Conrad, for sharing us. And hopefully we can have you back on a webinar as well.
Of course. Guys, thanks so much for coming. It was a lot of fun.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Bye.